What kind of children's show opens with a scene of two guys dropping acid, hallucinating, and transforming into a blue jay and a raccoon? Because that's how Regular Show started. Not the pilot, the actual origin. The seed that became this show was a CalArts thesis film called 2 in the AM PM, where two gas station employees eat hallucinogenic candy and lose their minds. J.G. Quintel made that short in 2006, screened it at the Spike and Mike's Sick and Twisted Festival of Animation in 2007, and then somehow walked into Cartoon Network with this concept and convinced them to put it on the air at 8:15 on a Monday night, right between Adventure Time and whatever else was airing that fall. And they said yes. Now I want you to think about that. Really think about it. Because the story of Regular Show is the story of a show that was never actually designed for children, that never really pretended to be for children, and that spent 8 seasons and 244 episodes smuggling some of the darkest, strangest, most existentially unsettling content ever broadcast on a network with the word cartoon in its name, and getting away with it over and over again because it dressed everything up in the language of an 11-minute comedy about two slackers who work at a park. Tonight, we're going through all of it, the whole thing. How a show about a blue jay and a raccoon trying to set up chairs or buy a keyboard or return a library book became one of the most subversive, emotionally devastating, and genuinely adult animated series of its era. We're talking about death, real, permanent, on-screen death in a kid's show. We're talking about a character whose entire existence is built on centuries of grief over a woman he lost. We're talking about an episode where people get disintegrated for losing an arcade game. We're talking about a finale that made grown adults cry because a gentle man with a lollipop-shaped head sacrificed himself to save the universe, and his final words were, "Jolly good show." So if you're watching this late at night, and I know most of you are, get comfortable. This is going to be a long one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it. It helps us keep making these deep dives. And honestly, the fact that anyone wants to listen to me talk about Regular Show for this long is still kind of surreal to me. Here's the thing about Regular Show that most people get wrong right out of the gate. They call it a kids show, and I get why. It aired on Cartoon Network. It had a TV PG rating. It's animated. And the two main characters are a 6-foot-tall blue jay and a raccoon. On the surface, it looks like any other cartoon that exists to fill a programming block between school and dinner. But the second you actually start watching it, and I mean really watching it, not just having it on in the background while you eat cereal, you realize that this show was built from the ground up for a completely different audience. It was made for people in their 20s, people stuck in dead-end jobs, people who play too many video games and avoid responsibility, and are quietly terrified that life is passing them by. The fact that children also watched it is almost incidental, almost an accident, almost a punchline. And that's the first thread I want to follow tonight, because Regular Show operates on 2 parallel tracks simultaneously, and the tension between those tracks is where every single interesting thing about this show lives. On one track, you have The Surface, a workplace comedy about cartoon animals doing mundane jobs at a park and getting into escalating supernatural chaos. On the other track, you have The Subtext, a genuinely unflinching meditation on growing up, wasting your potential, the terror of commitment, the grief of change, and the slow realization that you are not going to be young forever. And Quintel was running both of those tracks at full speed from the very first episode. September 6th, 2010. That's when The Power aired, Season 1, Episode 1. Mordecai and Rigby punch a hole in their wall while wrestling with a doll named Beef Burrito. And I need you to understand, this is 2 23-year-old men living in a house owned by their employer, sharing a room, wrestling with a toy. They find a magical keyboard that Rigby stole from a wizard who was relieving himself in a bush, a detail the show just drops and moves on from, and they use it to try and get a raise from Benson. The episode ends with Rigby accidentally sending Skips to the moon and then using the keyboard to manipulate reality until everything spirals completely out of control. That first episode pulled 2.1 million viewers, and Quintel later said it was his favorite episode of the entire series. Here's what I think most people miss about that premiere though. The magical keyboard, the wizard, the moon. That's the A-plot. And it's fun. It's creative. It establishes the show's escalation formula immediately. But the real content of that first episode is something much simpler and much darker. Two guys in their 20s who have literally nothing. They share a room. They work a minimum wage groundskeeping job. Their boss, a sentient gumball machine, treats them with open contempt because they can't be trusted with basic tasks. And their response to a hole in their wall isn't, "Let's fix it," or "Let's tell someone." It's, "Let's find a way to get more money without actually working." That's not a children's cartoon setup. That's the opening scene of a Judd Apatow movie about millennial aimlessness. And the fact that it's wrapped in a story about a magical keyboard and a wizard doesn't change what it's actually about. I've rewatched The Power probably 7 or 8 times putting this together. And here's the thing that gets me every single time. Quintel knew. He knew from day one that the escalation, the supernatural chaos, the cosmic stakes, was a delivery mechanism for something else entirely. Cartoon Network literally told him they wanted to age up their programming from the TVY7 stuff they'd been doing. And Quintel took that directive and ran with it in a direction I don't think anyone at the network fully understood until it was too late. Look, to understand why Regular Show could be what it was, you have to understand who J.G. Quintel is and where he came from. James Garland Quintel was born on September 13th, 1982, in Hanford, California. And by his own account, Hanford was boring. Not charmingly boring, actually boring. The kind of town where you and your friends have to invent things to do. And that detail matters, because you can see it in every single frame of Regular Show. The park, the show's primary setting, is a place where two guys are so bored by their jobs that they will literally risk the destruction of reality itself just to find something interesting to do. Quintel has said that Mordecai embodies who he was during his CalArts years, hanging out with friends, getting into stupid situations, but also taking things seriously enough. The character of Rigby came about even more randomly. Quintel just drew a raccoon hula hooping, liked the design, and built the character to be less responsible than Mordecai. Quintel went to the California Institute of the Arts, where he participated in these 48-hour film competitions. Students would pull a word out of a hat at midnight, and then spend the weekend making a short film based on that word. 2 of the films that came out of those sessions, The Naive Man from Lollyland in 2005 and 2 in the AM/PM in 2006, would directly become the DNA of Regular Show. The Naive Man from Lollyland introduced an early version of Pops. 2 in the AM/PM introduced early versions of Mordecai and Benson, and both shorts featured the voice work of Quintel and his classmate Sam Marin, who would go on to voice Benson, Pops, and Muscle Man on the show. And here's where things get darkly funny. And this is the second track I want you to follow, because 2 in the AM/PM is a short film about 2 guys who accidentally eat acid-laced candy and hallucinate wildly. The characters swear constantly. There's brief nudity. It played at the Sick and Twisted Festival of Animation. And the characters that became Mordecai and Benson, they originate as drug hallucinations. That's not something the show tried to hide. It was just something nobody ever talked about, because the target audience for Regular Show the TV series was theoretically children who wouldn't know to look for a leaked CalArts short film from 2006. But if you do know, if you've seen 2 in the AM/PM, the entire show takes on a different dimension. Every escalation, every reality-bending, supernatural event, every time Mordecai and Rigby's mundane task spirals into cosmic insanity, you can read it as the show's DNA asserting itself. The acid trip never really ended. It just got a TVPG rating and an 8:15 time slot. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying the show is actually about drugs. That's the lazy reading. And Quintel himself has pushed back on it. What I'm saying is that Regular Show carries the sensibility of its Adult Swim-adjacent origins into every episode. And that sensibility is fundamentally not designed for children. The surrealism, the body horror, the casual violence, the existential dread dressed up as comedy, it all comes from a creative origin point that was explicitly adult, and the translation to Cartoon Network's daytime block was less sanitize the concept, and more keep the concept, lose the swearing. Let me give you a concrete example of what I mean, because I think it crystallizes both tracks of the show better than anything else I can point to. The second episode of the entire series, Just Set Up the Chairs, aired on September 13th, 2010. The premise is almost aggressively simple. Benson assigns Mordecai and Rigby to set up 50 chairs for a kid's birthday party. That's it. That's the job. And they can't even do that without getting distracted, finding an old arcade game in a storage room, playing it, and accidentally unleashing a being called the Destroyer of Worlds, who burns the birthday party's hired entertainment, a drunk clown and a talking horse, to ash. Literal ash. The episode ends with Benson ordering Mordecai and Rigby to sweep up the cremated remains of the entertainers on a children's network at 8 in the evening. And the thing that kills me about this episode, the thing I keep coming back to, is that the show plays this completely straight. There is no wink to the audience. There is no, oh, they're just sleeping, or don't worry, they're fine. The special entertainment is dead, burned to cinders. And the punchline isn't that this is horrifying. The punchline is that Mordecai and Rigby still have to clean it up, and they decide to take a break first. The dark humor isn't a spice in this show, it's the main course. And it was there from episode 2. Okay, so let's talk about the escalation formula, because it's the engine that drives absolutely everything in regular show. And it's also the thing that allowed Quintel to hide genuinely adult storytelling inside what looked like a simple cartoon. The formula goes like this. Mordecai and Rigby are given a mundane task, or encounter a mundane problem. They try to solve it through shortcuts, laziness, or spectacularly poor decision-making. A supernatural, surreal, or apocalyptic element enters the picture, often because they broke a rule, ignored a warning, or messed with something they shouldn't have touched. The situation escalates dramatically, usually threatening their jobs, their lives, or the fabric of reality itself. They fix it, usually with help from Skips or the wider park crew, and everything resets, except it doesn't. Not really, because the emotional aftermath lingers, even when the supernatural threat doesn't. Here's the thing though, and this is what separates regular show from every other wacky cartoon that followed a similar structure. The escalation isn't random, it's thematic. Every supernatural disaster is a metaphor for the actual human problem at the episode's core. When Mordecai and Rigby unleash the Destroyer of Worlds by playing an old arcade game instead of doing their job, the episode isn't actually about a monster. It's about what happens when you choose distraction over responsibility. And the show's answer is that people get hurt, things get destroyed, and you still have to clean up the mess afterward. When Rigby's catchy song gets stuck in his head in This Is My Jam, and literally manifests as a sentient cassette tape monster, it's about the way trivial things can take over your life, if you let them. The supernatural is never just decoration, it's always commentary. And that's a level of intentionality that you almost never see in a show rated TVPG. Quintel and his writers developed this formula deliberately. As he put it in interviews, the narrative structure was designed to take advantage of animation, to do things that live-action sitcoms couldn't. But the writer's room worked from personal experience. The plots came from real situations. Prank phone calls, eating challenges, arguments over who's better at video games, the social awkwardness of trying to ask someone out. Then they'd ask, what's the worst possible version of this? What if the stakes escalated to the point of cosmic catastrophe? And the result was a show where setting up chairs leads to fighting a world-destroying demon, where returning a library book leads to a time-traveling chase sequence, and where trying to watch a pay-per-view fight leads to the literal personification of death showing up at your house. I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up, and it's this. The escalation formula is itself a metaphor for anxiety. Think about it. If you've ever had anxiety, and if you're watching a video essay about regular show at 2 in the morning, odds are decent that you have. You know what it feels like when a small problem spirals in your head. You forget to reply to a text, and suddenly you're convinced you've destroyed a friendship. You make a minor mistake at work, and suddenly you're mentally rehearsing getting fired, losing your apartment, ending up on the street. The gap between mundane problem and cosmic catastrophe is exactly the gap that anxiety creates in your brain. And regular show externalizes that gap. It makes it literal. It says, here is what it feels like when every small thing becomes the end of the world. And then it says, but you survive it. Every time, you survive it. And you clean up the mess. And you sit on the steps and drink a soda with your best friend. And life goes on. That's not a message for 8-year-olds. That's a message for 23-year-olds who are terrified they're wasting their lives. But here's where things get really interesting. And this is where the two tracks of regular show start to diverge and then slam back into each other in ways the show doesn't always get credit for. Track 1, the surface comedy, stays remarkably consistent across all 8 seasons. The formula works. Mundane problem, supernatural escalation, resolution, laugh, gasp, reset. It's reliable, and it's the reason the show could produce 244 episodes without ever feeling like it ran out of ideas, because literally any everyday situation could become an episode. Doing laundry? Episode. Making a sandwich? Episode. Trying to win a stuffed animal at the arcade? Episode. The flexibility of the formula was its greatest strength as a comedy. But track 2, the emotional subtext, the actual adult content, evolves dramatically over the show's run. And following that evolution is where regular show becomes something much more than a clever comedy with a good formula. Because what Quintel was actually doing, across 8 seasons from 2010 to 2017, was telling a complete story about what it means to grow up. And he was doing it so gradually that most viewers didn't realize it was happening until it was too late to look away. Look at season 1, 12 episodes. The characters are sketches. Mordecai and Rigby are slackers. Benson is angry. Skips knows things. Pops is innocent. Muscle Man tells "my mom" jokes. High Five Ghost is there. The episodes are almost pure formula, mundane task, escalation, resolution, and the show is finding its voice. The language is rougher than it would become later. Rigby says things like, "How in the H are we going to fix this S?" And that's in the original broadcast version. Cartoon Network later censored seasons 1 through 3 for their digital releases. The show is testing what it can get away with, and the answer at that point was quite a lot. But even in season 1, you can see the seeds of something deeper. The unicorns have got to go. The most watched season 1 episode with 2.4 million viewers is about Mordecai buying a cologne called Dude Time that attracts rowdy unicorn bros. On the surface, it's about farting unicorns and getting rid of annoying house guests. But underneath, it's about the seductive pull of toxic friendships. The way you can lose your real friends by trying to look cool for people who don't actually care about you. And I mean, the show doesn't spell that out. It doesn't need to. The metaphor does the work. The unicorns are the guys at the party who seem fun until they trash your house and alienate everyone who actually matters to you. And Rigby, who spends the episode feeling abandoned by Mordecai, is the real friend who was there the whole time. See, this is what I mean about regular show never being for kids. A child watches that episode and sees farting unicorns. An adult watches it and sees the social dynamics of their early 20s played back to them in excruciating detail. Both readings are valid. Both readings are intended. But only one of them is what the show is actually about. I need to talk about Skips now, because his character is where regular show's darkness goes from subtext to text in a way that still kind of shocks me when I think about it. Mark Hamill voices Skips. Yes, Luke Skywalker himself, and also the most iconic Joker in animation history. And he brings this incredible weight to a character who could easily have been just the strong, wise guy who fixes things. Because that's what Skips is on the surface. He's an immortal Yeti. He knows how to solve most of the supernatural problems that Mordecai and Rigby create. He's the one they go to when everything goes wrong. He skips everywhere instead of walking. He's dependable, quiet, competent. But why does he skip? Why is he immortal? And what happened to him? The show drops hints for years, little details that don't quite add up. The fact that Skips is immortal but doesn't seem happy about it. The fact that he does a special dance on his birthday to maintain his immortality, which implies it's a burden he chooses to carry rather than a gift. The fact that the character of Death, who is a recurring presence in the show, voiced with this casual menace, has a specific grudge against Skips because his immortality cheats death of a client. And then, in season 5, the show gives us Skip's Story, a half-hour special that aired on April 21st, 2014, in which I genuinely think is one of the most devastating episodes of television Cartoon Network has ever produced. Here's what we learn. Skips was originally called Walks. He was a teenager in what appears to be the early 1800s. The show plays with timelines, mixing period clothing with 80s high school movie aesthetics in a way that's both intentionally anachronistic and oddly perfect. He was a fighter. He'd been expelled from multiple schools for starting brawls. At his latest school, he meets Gareth and the Guardians of Eternal Youth, the Immortal Student Council, and a bully named Clorgbane. and he meets Mona, Desdemona. And here's the thing that gets me. Here's the part where this stops being a funny cartoon about a Yeti and becomes something genuinely heartbreaking. Walks and Mona fall in love. She teaches him to stop fighting. They skip together around the school grounds. The show takes its time with this, lets you see them happy, lets you invest in this relationship. And the whole time, if you know that Skips is immortal and alone in the present day, you know where this is going. You know it's going to end badly, and it does. At the prom, Clorgbane attacks. Mona pushes Walks out of the way of falling debris and is crushed. She dies, on screen, in a kid's show, and the only thing left of her is the necklace Walks gave her, pulled from the rubble. I need you to think about what the show is saying here for a second. Skips, the guy who fixes everything, the steady, reliable presence who keeps the park running, is a man who has been alive for over 200 years because the woman he loved died saving his life, and he chose immortality as a way to fight the monster who killed her every 157 years. Every single time we see him skip instead of walk, he is memorializing a dead woman. Mona suggested the name Skips as a joke while they were skipping together. He took it as his new name when the Guardians offered him immortality. He has been performing an act of remembrance with every step he takes for 2 centuries. And this is in a show where the B-plot of an average episode is Rigby trying to win a bet about who can eat more pizza. The tonal range of this show, the gap between ham boning will save your life someday and an immortal Yeti has been mourning his dead girlfriend for 200 years, is something I don't think any other animated show has ever pulled off with this kind of consistency. And the darkly funny part is that kids watching this episode probably just thought, cool origin story, he fights a space monster, rad. And adults watching it thought, this is a story about how grief makes you immortal, about how loss freezes you in place, about how you can spend centuries being useful and helpful and reliable, and none of it fills the hole that losing someone leaves. And that's the dark humor of regular show at its most potent, right? The comedy and the tragedy aren't separate things. They're the same thing viewed from different angles. Rigby making a "my mom" joke, and Muscle Man's entire identity being built around juvenile humor. That's funny if you're 12. But if you're 25, you start to notice that Muscle Man's constant deflection through humor is a defense mechanism. That his "my mom" jokes are a way of keeping people at arm's length. And that when the show finally lets him be vulnerable, his relationship with Starla, his father's death, his wedding, the emotional payoff is enormous, precisely because we spent 6 seasons watching him hide behind jokes. Speaking of death, and I mean the character, not the concept, although honestly in this show, they're almost the same thing. Let me talk about how casually regular show treats mortality, because it's one of the show's most adult qualities, and it's hiding in plain sight. Death shows up as a recurring character. He looks like a heavy metal skeleton. He speaks with this low, casual menace. He's voiced by Julian Holloway. And the show treats him not as a terrifying villain, but as a guy. A dude who has a job, a family, a mortgage. Probably. He plays arm wrestling matches. He makes bets. He's annoyed that Skips cheats him by being immortal. He shows up to parties. And the normalization of death as just another character in the show's world is doing something that I think flies completely over children's heads. It's saying that death is a mundane, everyday presence in your life. It's not special. It's not dramatic. It's just there, hanging around, waiting. Like a coworker you don't particularly like, but have to deal with. And when the show does actually kill characters, it doesn't flinch. People die in regular show. They get disintegrated, burned, exploded, erased from existence. The tone varies. Sometimes it's played for laughs. Sometimes it's played for genuine horror, but the show never pretends that the supernatural escalation is harmless. There are consequences. People get hurt, sometimes permanently. And the fact that the show can pivot from a scene of Mordecai and Rigby goofing off to a scene where someone is genuinely in mortal danger and make both moments feel earned is a tightrope act that I don't think gets enough credit. This brings me to one of the darkest and most brilliant things regular show ever did. And it's something that builds slowly across multiple seasons before detonating in the finale. The story of Pops. Pops Maillard. Where do I even start with Pops? He's the son of Mr. Maillard, the park's owner. He has a lollipop-shaped head. He's innocent, joyful, childlike, endlessly enthusiastic about butterflies and giving good shows and being kind to people. He calls things jolly good show. He's the emotional heart of the entire series. And for most of the show's run, he seems like the simplest character, just a sweet, eccentric old man who lives in the park and provides comic relief through his naivety. And then the show reveals what Pops actually is, and it changes everything. I need to set this up properly, because the genius of what Quintel did with Pops only works if you understand how long he waited to play this card. For 7 seasons, Pops is just Pops. Sweet, funny, occasionally weird Pops. Sam Marin voices him with this distinctive high-pitched British-tinged vocal quality that makes every line he delivers sound simultaneously adorable and slightly unsettling. And scattered throughout those 7 seasons are tiny, almost imperceptible hints that something bigger is going on with Pops. Little moments where he demonstrates abilities he shouldn't have. Little suggestions that his father, Mr. Maillard, is hiding something. The show is planting seeds so subtly that you don't even notice them growing. And then season 8 happens. Regular show in space. The park is literally launched into orbit. I'm not being metaphorical. The entire park is encased in a dome and shot into space. And we learn the truth about Pops. He's not just a man with a lollipop-shaped head. He is Megacranus, the chosen one of a planet called Lollyland. And he has an evil twin brother named Anti-Pops, Mr. Ross, who exists as his cosmic opposite. Pops and Anti-Pops have fought each other for control of the universe an infinite number of times. And every single time, their clash has reset reality. Every universe that has ever existed has been a cycle. Pops and Anti-Pops fight. They stalemate, the universe reboots, and it all starts again. And the park crew, Mordecai, Rigby, Benson, Skips, Muscleman, High Five Ghost, they've all existed before, in every iteration of the universe. They've always fought alongside Pops. They've always lost. The tapestries on Lollyland show them in different forms across countless cycles. They are eternal supporting characters in a cosmic drama that has been playing out since before time had meaning. If you're following this, and if you're still awake at this point, you're one of my people, then you understand what the show is doing. It's taking the episodic reset button that every cartoon relies on. The thing where nothing changes, where every episode ends where it began, where character growth is optional, and it's making it literal. It's saying, what if the reason nothing changes in this show is that the universe literally resets every time? What if the formula, mundane task, escalation, resolution, reset, is the actual structure of reality? And what if the only way to break the cycle is to do something that has never been done before? That's what happens in A Regular Epic Final Battle, the 3-part series finale that aired on January 16th, 2017. And I genuinely think it might be the best finale in animated television history. Here's what happens. And I'm not going to dance around spoilers, because if you're still here, you either know or you need to know. Pops faces Anti-Pops. They fight. The universe begins to reset, just like it always does. Mordecai and Rigby are sent back to the beginning of the first episode. Literally, they relive the opening of The Power, the very first scene of the very first episode. But Rigby feels deja vu. He remembers. They find a set of Blu-ray discs that contain all their memories, all their adventures, all 8 seasons of the show, and they use the magical keyboard from episode 1 to travel back to the fight. And here's the moment that destroyed me. Pops realizes that fighting Anti-Pops will just reset the universe again, like it always has. So he does something different. He hugs him. He wraps his arms around his evil twin brother and gives him genuine, unconditional love. And Anti-Pops, for the first time in infinite iterations of the universe, hesitates. And in that hesitation, Pops pushes both of them into the sun. Pops dies. He sacrifices himself, and the universe doesn't reset. For the first time in eternity, the cycle is broken. And the show tells us what happens next. A montage set to David Bowie's Heroes. And the fact that this aired almost exactly a year after Bowie's death adds a layer that Quintel may or may not have intended, but that hits regardless, showing us 25 years of the park crew's future. Mordecai leaves the park, becomes a painter, marries a Batwoman named Steph. Rigby marries Eileen and has children. Muscleman and Starla have a huge family, and their kids adopt all of Muscleman's mannerisms, including taking off their shirts and yelling. High Five Ghost and his girlfriend Celia become party DJs in Prague. Benson takes over the park after Mr. Maillard's death, marries Pam, and adopts 5 cats and a pig. Skips keeps working at the park, still alone, but now in jean shorts instead of jeans. And then, 25 years later, they all come back for a reunion. they raise a statue of Mr. Maillard next to the one they already built for Pops. And Mordecai, now 57 years old, wearing glasses and a beard, says to Rigby, "I wish Pops could have been here to see this." And Rigby says, "Well, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have this." And then the show cuts to heaven, or some version of it, and Pops is there, watching his friends on a VHS tape labeled Regular Show. He ejects the tape, he smiles, and he says, "Jolly good show." I've thought about that ending probably once a week since it aired, and I want to talk about why it works so devastatingly well. Because it's not just a good finale, it's the culmination of everything both tracks of the show were building toward from the very first episode. Track 1, the surface comedy, gets its perfect conclusion because the show literally recreates its first episode, then destroys the formula that made it possible. The escalation formula, the mundane to cosmic pipeline, the reset button, they're all revealed to be the structural expression of a cosmic cycle. And breaking that cycle means the show has to end. Regular Show cannot continue to exist in a world where things actually change. The formula and the storytelling were always on a collision course, and the finale is where they crash into each other. That's meta on a level that I don't think even the most ardent Regular Show fans fully appreciated at the time. Track 2, the emotional subtext, gets its conclusion too, and this is the part that hurts. Because what is Regular Show actually about? What has it always been about? Underneath the escalation and the chaos and the 80s references and the monster fights, it's about the fear of growing up. It's about Mordecai and Rigby being terrified that things will change, that their friendship will evolve, that they'll have to take responsibility, that the park, this comfortable, irresponsible, consequence-free zone, will not last forever. And the finale says, you're right, it doesn't last forever. Pops dies, the park changes, everyone moves on, you grow up, you get married, you have kids, you get old. And the thing that kept you young, the thing that kept reality resetting, that kept everything the same, that let you avoid consequences forever, was actually a cage. A beautiful, comfortable cage, but a cage. And the only way out is sacrifice. Growth requires loss. Change requires death. And the show chose to literalize that by killing the most innocent, most childlike character in its entire cast, Pops, the character based on Quintel's CalArts thesis film, The Naive Man from Lollyland, the first Regular Show character to ever exist. The embodiment of childlike wonder and joy and innocence. He's the one who has to die for everyone else to grow up. And if that's not one of the most brutal, metaphorical moves a children's cartoon has ever made, I don't know what is. Okay, I need to pull back from the finale for a minute because I've been building toward it, and I want to slow down and spend some time in the middle of the show, where a lot of the most interesting, most not for kids content actually lives. Because it's easy to point at the finale and say, see, this show was deep. But the truth is that Regular Show was doing dark, adult, genuinely complex storytelling long before the space arc and the cosmic battles. And a lot of it hides in episodes that people dismiss as filler. Let me talk about Eggcellent, Season 3, Episode 17. This is the episode that won Regular Show its Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Short Format Animated Program in 2012. The premise is simple. There's a restaurant that offers a free trucker hat to anyone who can eat a 12-egg omelet in under a certain time. Rigby tries it, turns out he's allergic to eggs, and goes into a coma. Mordecai then has to complete the challenge himself to win the hat for his unconscious best friend. And look, on paper, that's a fun premise. A high-stakes eating challenge, a cool hat, a comatose raccoon. Classic Regular Show. But the emotional core of the episode is something else entirely. It's about what you do when your friend is hurt. It's about taking a stupid thing seriously because it matters to someone you love. Rigby wanted that hat. It's a dumb hat. It doesn't matter, but it matters to Rigby, and so it matters to Mordecai. And so Mordecai trains for this challenge, like he's preparing for the fight of his life. There's a training montage. There's a mentor figure. And there's this moment where Benson, the guy who yells at Mordecai and Rigby every single episode, who threatens to fire them constantly, who represents every frustrating boss you've ever had, shows up at the hospital and tells Mordecai that Rigby is going to be okay and that he should go win that hat. I remember watching that scene for the first time and thinking, okay, Benson cares. Under all the yelling and the threats and the frustration, Benson actually cares about these two idiots, and the show never makes a big deal out of it. It just shows you in a small, quiet moment and lets you figure out the rest. That's adult storytelling. That's the kind of emotional complexity that children's programming isn't supposed to have. The Emmy for Eggcellent was a validation of something that regular show fans had known for 2 seasons. This wasn't a normal cartoon. This was something operating at a completely different level. And the fact that it beat out shows like Robot Chicken and Phineas and Ferb for that award says something about how the industry perceived it. Even the Television Academy looked at this show and said, there's more going on here than meets the eye. Now, I want to trace a thread that runs through the entire series, and that I think is the single most not-for-kids thing regular show ever did: Mordecai's romantic life. Because holy cow, this show went places with its love stories that I would not have expected from any animated series, let alone one on Cartoon Network. The broad strokes. Mordecai has a crush on Margaret Smith, a red-breasted robin who works at the coffee shop. This builds across seasons 1 through 4. They're friends. He's awkward around her. She has other boyfriends. He pines. It's painful and relatable in a way that I think hit 20-something viewers harder than any other element of the show, because we've all been Mordecai. We've all had that person we liked, but couldn't quite reach. And we've all made it weird by overthinking and hesitating and missing moments. And then, in season 4, they finally get together. They kiss in meteor moves, they start dating, and it's great. And then the season 4 finale happens. Stake me Amadeus. And Margaret tells Mordecai she's been accepted to her dream college and she has to go. She can't be his girlfriend. She cries. She runs out of the restaurant, and the episode ends with Mordecai and Rigby sitting on the roof of the house at sunset, drinking sodas in silence. That's it. That's the ending of the season. 2 friends on a roof, not talking, because there's nothing to say. One of them just got his heart broken, and the other one is just there, being there. And the show holds on that image. It doesn't fill the silence with a joke. It doesn't give you a reassuring tagline. It just sits with the sadness. And if you were in your 20s when that episode aired, August 12th, 2013, you felt that. You felt it in your bones. Because Regular Show was the first cartoon that made heartbreak feel like heartbreak, not like a plot device. And then it got worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. Mordecai goes through a depression. The show doesn't shy away from it. He sits in dark rooms. He listens to sad music. He drives 20 hours to Margaret's college to return a sweater he found while doing laundry. It's pathetic, and it's real, and it's the exact kind of behavior that every person who's ever been through a breakup recognizes instantly. And the show doesn't judge him for it. It just shows it, honestly, with all the messy, embarrassing reality intact. Then CJ enters the picture, Cloudy J, a cloud humanoid who Mordecai meets at a New Year's Eve party. She's voiced by Linda Cardellini. And here's the thing about CJ that makes the show's romantic subplot genuinely brilliant and genuinely painful. She's better for Mordecai than Margaret was. She's more fun. She's more adventurous. She shares his interests. They have actual chemistry, not just Mordecai's projection of chemistry. And the show knows it. The show shows you, clearly and repeatedly, that CJ is the right person for Mordecai at this point in his life. And then Margaret comes back from college, and Mordecai's unresolved feelings bubble up. And in Merry Christmas, Mordecai, he and Margaret accidentally kiss in front of CJ, and everything falls apart. I keep saying, this isn't a kid's show, and I know that can sound like a broken record at this point, but I need you to think about what this show just did. It took a love triangle, the most soap opera, most adult drama plot structure imaginable, and it played it completely straight. No jokes. No, it was a misunderstanding. Mordecai kissed his ex in front of his girlfriend, and his girlfriend was devastated. And everyone watching felt sick because we'd all seen this coming, and we'd all hoped it wouldn't happen, and then it did. And the show spent multiple episodes dealing with the fallout, not in a neat, clean way, in a messy, uncomfortable, human way. CJ was hurt. Margaret was conflicted. Mordecai was paralyzed by indecision, incapable of choosing, terrified of hurting anyone, and hurting everyone by doing nothing. This is the arc that some fans cite as the worst part of Regular Show, and I understand why. It's uncomfortable. It's frustrating. Mordecai's inability to make a decision, his pattern of self-sabotage, his way of ruining things by trying too hard not to ruin them. It's infuriating to watch, but it's also the most honest depiction of a specific kind of 20-something romantic dysfunction that I've ever seen in animation. Mordecai isn't a villain. He's not cruel, he's just scared. He's terrified of commitment and terrified of loss, and he can't reconcile those fears. And so he does nothing, and doing nothing is its own kind of cruelty. Remember what I said earlier about the escalation formula being a metaphor for anxiety? This is that, applied to relationships. The mundane problem, I have feelings for two people, escalates into cosmic catastrophe, with CJ literally transforming into a storm cloud when she's angry and nearly destroying things. The supernatural element externalizes the emotional reality. CJ's storms aren't just special effects. They're what jealousy and betrayal feel like from the inside. And the resolution? The show dumps Mordecai at Muscle Man's wedding. Dumped at the altar, the season 6 finale. Mordecai, in a moment of spectacularly poor judgment, tries to resolve his love triangle at his friend's wedding in front of everyone. CJ gives back the bracelet he gave her and leaves. And Mordecai is left alone. And the next season opens with an episode called Dumptown USA. Because of course it does. And here's the part that I think the show actually nailed. Even though it was controversial at the time, Mordecai doesn't end up with either of them. Not Margaret, not CJ. In the finale's flash forward, Mordecai marries a Batwoman named Steph, someone we've never met, someone from outside the show's romantic drama entirely. The show's writer Matt Price confirmed that CJ cut off contact with Mordecai, Margaret, Rigby, and Eileen after the breakup, and became a professional dodgeball player. That's bleak. That's consequences. That's the kind of realistic aftermath that you never see in a children's show, because children's shows aren't supposed to acknowledge that sometimes you burn bridges so badly that they stay burned. But it's also, in its own dark, honest way, the healthiest message the show could have delivered. Mordecai's pattern throughout the series was pining for someone who represented an idealized version of romance, Margaret, and then failing to appreciate someone who actually matched him, CJ. The show's solution isn't choose the right person. It's stop choosing based on your anxieties and your patterns, and let someone find you when you've actually figured out who you are. Mordecai becomes a painter. He grows up. He leaves the park. And then he meets someone. That's not a fairy tale ending. That's an adult ending. And it's the only honest one the show could have given. Okay, I want to shift gears and talk about something that I think is under-discussed in regular show analysis, and it's this: the show's relationship with nostalgia. Because Regular Show is one of the most nostalgic pieces of media ever created, and I think the way it uses nostalgia is both its greatest artistic achievement and its most subversive quality. The 80s references are everywhere, and they are not subtle. The soundtrack uses licensed 80s songs: I'm Alright, You're the Best Around, Mississippi Queen, Don't You Forget About Me, chosen because Quintel grew up loving that era and wanted to share it with a new generation. The visual aesthetic is steeped in VHS tapes, cassettes, arcade cabinets, old school televisions, and analog technology. The show looks like someone's childhood memories of the 80s and 90s, even though it's set in the present day. And Quintel was deliberate about this. He's talked about how the 80s left a major impression on him, and he wanted adult viewers to recognize and enjoy those references, while younger viewers might discover older music and culture through the show. Mark Mothersbaugh, of Devo, which is already an 80s touchstone, composed the show's original score, adding another layer of period-specific sonic texture. But here's what I think the show is actually doing with all that nostalgia, and this is where it gets dark again. Regular Show doesn't just reference the 80s, it's obsessed with them. The characters are surrounded by outdated technology in a modern world. They watch VHS tapes. They play old arcade games. They listen to cassettes. And the show presents this not as cute retro quirk, but as something more uncomfortable, an inability to let go. These characters are clinging to the past. They're living in a world of old technology and old music and old ways of doing things, because the present, with its responsibilities, its expectations, its relentless forward march, is too overwhelming to face. Think about that in the context of the show's core theme of growing up. Mordecai and Rigby don't just avoid their jobs, they avoid the present. They retreat into nostalgia, into the comfort of old games and old music and old ways of having fun. Because engaging with the present means engaging with the fact that they're 23 and going nowhere. The 80s aesthetic isn't decoration. It's a defense mechanism, and the show is both celebrating it because it's genuinely cool and the music is great and arcade games are fun, and gently questioning it. Is it healthy to live this way? Is there a point where nostalgia stops being comforting and starts being a cage? And when the show's finale launches the park into space and forces the characters to confront their cosmic destiny, isn't it, on some level, saying, you can't hide in the park forever? I actually think about this a lot when I rewatch the early seasons. There's an episode in season 2 called Ello Governor, where Rigby becomes terrified of a character from a cheesy British horror movie, and the fear follows him into the real world. And on one level, it's a fun horror comedy episode, but on another level, it's about the way media from your childhood imprints on you. The way a movie you saw when you were 9 can still terrify you when you're 23. Your childhood never fully lets you go. Your nostalgia has teeth. This is also why the show's final season, set in space, was such a bold creative decision. By physically removing the characters from the park, from their comfort zone, from the setting that defined the show for 7 seasons, Quintel was saying, growth requires leaving. You have to go somewhere new. You have to face things you've never faced. And yes, it's terrifying. And yes, some of you will miss the old show, the one where they just set up chairs and fought arcade monsters. But that show was always building toward this. The formula was always going to break. The park was always going to change. That was the point. That was always the point. Let me circle back to something I mentioned near the beginning of this video, because I think it's time to address it directly. The myth that Regular Show was originally intended for Adult Swim and only ended up on Cartoon Network due to scheduling issues. This is one of those bits of fan lore that has been repeated so often that people assume it's true, and it's not. According to the trivia documented by the show's production team, Regular Show was always in development for Cartoon Network's daytime block. The adult content, the language, the innuendo, the darker themes came from Cartoon Network's directive to create TVPG content that was a step up from their earlier TVY7 programming. They wanted to push the envelope. They just didn't fully anticipate how far Quintel would push it. And I think that's actually more interesting than the Adult Swim myth, right? Because the myth suggests that the show was accidentally placed on the wrong network, that its adult qualities were a mistake. The reality is that Cartoon Network actively asked for something more mature, and Quintel delivered a show that was exactly what they asked for, and also way more than they asked for. The adult content isn't a bug, it's a feature. It was always intentional, and the network supported it, at least initially. They told Quintel to age things up. He did, and then he kept going. And by the time anyone thought to say, wait, maybe this is too much, the show had already found its audience, and it was too late to pull back. Here's another thing that I think gets lost in discussions about Regular Show: the voice acting. And I don't just mean that the cast is talented. Obviously they are. J.G. Quintel voices Mordecai and High Five Ghost. William Salyers voices Rigby. Sam Marin voices Benson, Pops, and Muscle Man, which is insane when you think about it, because those 3 characters sound nothing alike. Mark Hamill voices Skips. Roger Craig Smith voices Thomas. Janie Haddad. Tompkins voices Margaret. Minty Lewis voices Eileen. But what makes the voice acting special is how natural it sounds, and that was completely by design. Quintel's goal was to make the show listenable, his word, in contrast to most cartoons, which tend to feature loud, broad vocal performances that can be exhausting for adult viewers. He wanted the characters to sound like they were having actual conversations, not performing for an audience. And the cast recorded their lines together, as a group, rather than individually, in separate sessions. This is relatively unusual for animation, and it gives the dialogue this overlapping, spontaneous quality that you just don't get when actors are recording alone in a booth. When Mordecai and Rigby are talking over each other, they're actually talking over each other. When Benson screams at them, Sam Marin is actually reacting to what Quintel and Salyers just said. The energy is real. And this naturalistic vocal approach is another reason the show reads as adult. Children's cartoons typically use exaggerated voices because children respond to broad, clear vocal signals. Regular Show does the opposite. The characters mumble. They trail off. They say dude and ugh and whatever with the same deflated energy that actual 23-year-olds use. If you close your eyes and just listen to a Regular Show episode, it sounds more like a mumblecore indie film than a Cartoon Network production. And that's entirely the point. I want to talk about Thomas for a minute, because the Thomas arc is one of the show's most underrated storylines, and it's also one of its most genuinely bizarre. Thomas appears in the season 4 premiere, Exit 9B, as a new intern at the park. He's a goat. He's bland. He doesn't do much. For 2 full seasons, he's basically furniture. A background character who occasionally gets bullied by Muscle Man, calls his mom a lot, and otherwise fades into the wallpaper. And then comes The Real Thomas, a half-hour special in season 6. And the show reveals that Thomas is actually a Russian spy named Nikolai. His mom was actually a robot handler from a Russian intelligence agency called MOMM. His mission was to infiltrate the park and steal it, the entire park physically, by launching it on rockets to Russia so they could study it and improve their own park technology. And this isn't played as a joke. I mean, it's funny. Of course it's funny. It's regular show. But the spy thriller elements are played completely straight. There are double agents. There are chase sequences. There are moral dilemmas about loyalty versus friendship. And in the end, Nikolai betrays Russia to save the park crew, and then has to go into hiding because he's now a traitor to both the United States and Russia. Rigby's parting words to him, Das Vidania, Nikolai, you'll always be Thomas to us, are genuinely touching. And the show later reveals, through supplementary material, that Thomas fled to Canada and now owns a video store in Montreal that only rents out spy movies, which might be the darkest, funniest epilogue for any character on the show. But here's what I love about the Thomas reveal. It retroactively recontextualizes 2 entire seasons of the show. Every time Thomas was on the phone with his mom, he was receiving orders from Russian intelligence. Every time he seemed bland and uninteresting, he was maintaining his cover. His unremarkable personality was itself a disguise. And the show's production team has confirmed that Thomas wasn't originally written to be a spy. The decision was made later, and the writers went back and found all the moments where Thomas's behavior could be reinterpreted through the spy lens. It's like a magic trick. The setup happens in plain sight. The reveal reframes everything, and you can't believe you didn't see it coming. This is the kind of narrative playfulness that regular show excelled at, and it's another thing that goes over kids' heads. An 8-year-old doesn't rewatch seasons 4 and 5 looking for spy foreshadowing. A 25-year-old does. The show was designed to reward rewatching, and rewatching is an adult behavior. Kids watch forward, adults watch backward, looking for what they missed. I've been talking for a while now, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge something. The fact that you're still here says something about you. It says you care about this show in a way that goes beyond casual fandom. And I think regular show earns that investment in a way that not many shows do, because it never once treated its audience as passive consumers. It always assumed you were paying attention. It always assumed you could handle complexity. It always assumed you were old enough to deal with heartbreak and death and existential dread, even if you technically weren't. Let me talk about Benson, because Benson might be the single most adult character on the show, and I don't mean that as a compliment or an insult. I mean it literally. Benson is the only character in the main cast who consistently behaves like an adult, and the show treats this as both admirable and tragic. Benson is a gumball machine. He's the park manager. He spends approximately 60% of his screen time screaming at Mordecai and Rigby, threatening to fire them, and dealing with the consequences of their chaos. He is, on the surface, the unfun character, the buzzkill, the authority figure, the guy who represents everything Mordecai and Rigby are trying to avoid becoming. Kids watching the show are supposed to find him annoying. He's the mean boss. But if you're an adult, Benson is the most relatable character on the show. He is a middle manager who is good at his job, who takes pride in his work, who has genuine standards, and who is stuck supervising 2 employees who do not share his work ethic, who routinely destroy the park through negligence, and who never face permanent consequences because the show's formula demands a reset every 11 minutes. Benson is trapped in a system that doesn't reward his competence. And the moments when the show lets us see past his anger, when it shows us that he was once a drummer in a band, that he lost a relationship because he couldn't control his temper, that he genuinely cares about the park crew even when they drive him insane, those moments are devastating precisely because we understand what they cost him. Benson compromised. He grew up. He accepted responsibility. And his reward is this: a park, 2 slackers, an endless cycle of damage and repair. I think about Benson a lot, actually, in the context of the show's larger theme. Because if regular show is about the fear of growing up, then Benson is what growing up actually looks like from the inside. And it's not glamorous. It's not fun. It's showing up every day, doing your job, fixing what other people break, and going home alone at the end of it. The show doesn't demonize Benson for being an adult, but it doesn't make it look appealing either. And that ambivalence, that refusal to either celebrate or condemn adulthood, is one of the most honest things about the entire series. There's a scene in Think Positive, and I think about this scene constantly, where Benson is told by Pops that he can't yell at Mordecai and Rigby anymore, and Benson has to bottle his frustration, and it builds and builds and builds, and Sam Marin apparently lost his voice and got a migraine during the recording session because of how intensely he performed Benson's eventual explosion. That's commitment to a character. That's an actor who understands that Benson's anger isn't comedy, it's catharsis. It's the release valve for a man who has been holding everything together for everyone else and getting nothing in return. You know what's funny is that Benson's arc across the series mirrors something that I think a lot of people in their late 20s and 30s recognize. The slow transition from being the wild one to being the responsible one, and the grief that comes with that transition. There are episodes that hint at Benson's past. He was a drummer, he had dreams, he was passionate about music, and somewhere along the way, he traded all of that for stability, for the park, for a job where his greatest daily challenge is keeping two slackers from destroying everything. And the show never says whether that trade was worth it. It just shows you the results and lets you feel whatever you feel. I actually want to linger on Muscle Man for a minute here, because he's a character who I think gets written off way too quickly by both casual viewers and serious critics. Mitch Sorenstein, that's his real name. And the fact that the show gives this dude a real name and a real backstory when he could have just been the green guy who says my mom is already a signal that the show cares more about its characters than it has any obligation to. Sam Marin voices Muscle Man along with Benson and Pops, and the range that Marin brings to these three characters is genuinely astonishing. Benson is tightly wound and furious. Pops is airy and innocent. Muscle Man is loud, crude, and obnoxious. And they all live inside the same actor, and you'd never know it. Early in the show, Muscle Man is basically a joke machine. He tells my mom jokes. He takes his shirt off and twirls it around when he's excited. He's gross. He's annoying. And if you're watching as a kid, he's either hilarious or unbearable depending on your tolerance for that kind of humor. But as the show goes on, something happens with Muscle Man that I think is one of the most clever character developments in the series. The show reveals that his obnoxiousness is a performance. It's a mask. Underneath the my mom jokes and the shirtless yelling is a guy who is deeply insecure, fiercely loyal, and capable of tremendous emotional depth when the situation demands it. His relationship with Starla is the proof. Starla is, like Muscle Man, large, green, and loud. They are, on the surface, a joke. The gross couple. The ones who make everyone uncomfortable with their public displays of affection. But the show plays their relationship completely straight. They love each other. They fight. They break up and get back together. And when the show builds toward their wedding and Dumped at the Altar, it treats it with genuine emotion. Muscle Man is nervous. He wants his father's approval. The wedding matters. And the fact that the show can make you care about the wedding of a green cartoon man who says my mom in every episode is a testament to how good the writing is. And then there are the episodes dealing with Muscle Man's father. Muscle Dad's death is handled with real weight and sincerity, and Muscle Man has to process actual grief, not cartoon grief, but the kind of loss that stays with you. And his friends are there for him, not with grand speeches or supernatural solutions, but just by being present, by standing next to him. And that's the thing about Regular Show that I keep coming back to. It understands that the most profound moments in life aren't the cosmic battles. They're the quiet ones. The ones where someone is hurting and someone else is just there. High Five Ghost deserves a mention here too, even though he's probably the most underserved main character in the show. He's a ghost with a hand extending from the top of his head. He's Muscle Man's best friend. He doesn't talk much. For most of the series, he's almost a non-entity, the character who fills out the park crew, but doesn't get his own stories. But when the show does focus on him, particularly his romance with Celia and their long-distance relationship, it reveals a character who is quietly romantic, unexpectedly passionate about electronic music and DJ culture, and capable of genuine tenderness. The finale shows High Five Ghost and Celia as party DJs touring Prague, which is such a specific and weird and wonderful detail that it could only come from a show that loved its characters too much to give them generic endings. Okay, here's something I've been wanting to get into for a while now, and it's this. The Terror Tales of the Park episodes. These are the annual Halloween specials that regular show produced from Season 3 through Season 8. 6 installments total, each one structured as an anthology with multiple short horror stories framed by the main characters telling spooky tales. And these episodes are where the show's not for kids quality goes from subtext to bold, screaming text. Because the Terror Tales episodes are legitimately scary. Not scary for a kids show. Scary. Actually scary. Creepy Doll from the first Terror Tales in Season 3 features a vintage doll that comes to life and torments the characters in ways that are genuinely unsettling. The framing device itself, the characters sitting around, trying to one-up each other with increasingly disturbing stories, is borrowed directly from adult horror anthologies like The Twilight Zone and Tales from the Crypt. The fact that these episodes aired on Cartoon Network during prime time and were rated TVPG is either a testament to the network's trust in Quintel or evidence that nobody at Standards and Practices actually watched them all the way through. I actually think the Terror Tales episodes serve a deeper purpose beyond just being fun Halloween specials. They're the show's pressure release valve. In the regular episodes, the supernatural elements are always in service of the mundane story, the escalation formula, the metaphorical structure. But in the Terror Tales episodes, the supernatural gets to be itself. The horror gets to be horror. The darkness gets to be dark. And the show clearly relishes the freedom, because these episodes contain some of the most inventive, most visually ambitious, and most emotionally disturbing content in the entire series. And the claustrophobia of some of these segments, the existential horror of being stuck in situations you can't escape. Does that sound familiar? Does that remind you of the cosmic cycle that Pops and Anti-Pops are trapped in? The one where the universe resets over and over and nothing ever changes until someone sacrifices everything to break it? The Terror Tales episodes aren't just Halloween fun. They're thematic rehearsals for the show's endgame. They're the show practicing its most serious ideas in a context where the audience expects darkness, so that when those ideas show up in the main narrative, they land even harder. Let me pull on another thread that I think is crucial to understanding why regular show wasn't for kids: the show's economic subtext. This is something that almost nobody talks about, and I think it's one of the most important things the show does. Mordecai and Rigby are broke. They work a minimum wage job at a park. They share a room in a house owned by their employer. They cannot afford things. This is established in the pilot. They need a raise to fix a hole in their wall, and it remains consistent throughout the series. When they want concert tickets, they have to work overtime to earn them. When they go on dates, money is a factor. The show is not subtle about the fact that these characters exist on the economic margins, and the comedy often derives from the gap between what they want and what they can afford. Now, an 8-year-old watching this doesn't think twice about it. But a 23-year-old watching it in 2012, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, with student debt and no job prospects, and a vague sense that the economy has been rigged against their generation, that person feels seen. Because regular show is one of the only animated shows of its era that acknowledges economic precarity as a daily reality for young adults. Mordecai and Rigby aren't poor because they're lazy. Well, partly because they're lazy, but the job doesn't pay enough to motivate them. The work isn't meaningful. The career ladder doesn't exist. And the supernatural chaos that disrupts their daily tasks isn't just funny. It's the only thing that makes their lives feel significant. In the absence of economic opportunity, adventure becomes the substitute for ambition. This is a reading of the show that I think Quintel would recognize, even if he might not articulate it in exactly these terms. He's talked about how regular show grew out of his own experiences. The boring town, the dead-end jobs, the feeling of having to entertain yourself because nothing in your environment was going to do it for you. The park is a metaphor for that specific moment in young adulthood, where you're employed but not fulfilled, where you're surviving but not thriving, where you're surrounded by weirdness and you've normalized all of it, because what else are you going to do? And the show's solution, when it finally comes, isn't work harder or find a better job. It's grow up and leave. Mordecai becomes a painter. Rigby finds his own path. They leave the park. They build real lives with real stakes and real rewards. And the fact that it takes a literal cosmic apocalypse to push them toward that growth, that it takes the universe nearly ending for them to take the first step toward actual adulthood, is both darkly funny and uncomfortably real. Because isn't that how it works? Don't we all wait for some external crisis to force us into the changes we know we need to make? I want to come back to something I touched on earlier and expand on it, because I think it deserves more attention: the show's use of music. Regular Show's soundtrack is one of the most deliberate and emotionally intelligent uses of music in any animated series, and it operates on the same dual-track principle I've been describing throughout this video. Track 1, the licensed 80s songs. You're the Best Around by Joe Esposito during training montages. Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds for moments of emotional weight. Mississippi Queen by Mountain during fever dream sequences. Quintel has talked about how this started almost by accident. The writers and storyboard artists would use copyrighted songs as placeholder music in the animatics, and network executives liked what they heard and asked if they could keep the songs for the finished episodes. So the show started licensing the tracks, and the 80s music became a defining feature of Regular Show's identity. But here's the thing, and this is the second track. The music isn't just nostalgia bait, it's emotional shorthand. When the show plays an 80s power ballad over a montage of Mordecai training to eat a 12-egg omelet, it's doing two things simultaneously. For adults who recognize the song, it's activating a specific set of memories and associations. Rocky, Karate Kid, the entire 80s training montage tradition. For kids who don't know the song, it just sounds cool and dramatic. Both audiences have a valid experience, but the adult experience has an additional layer of self-aware meta-commentary. The show knows it's using the language of 80s movies. It knows that language is a little ridiculous, and it's using that ridiculousness to make the mundane feel epic, which is the entire project of Regular Show in miniature. And then there's the original score by Mark Mothersbaugh. Mothersbaugh is the co-founder of Devo, one of the most important new wave bands of the late 70s and early 80s. His involvement in Regular Show is itself a statement about the show's cultural ambitions. This isn't just a cartoon that references the 80s, it's a cartoon scored by an actual 80s icon. And Mothersbaugh's score is subtle in a way that I don't think gets enough appreciation. It's not loud or bombastic, it's moody, it's atmospheric. It creates a sense of place and tone that grounds the show's crazier moments in something emotionally real. When the supernatural escalation kicks in and the music shifts from Mothersbaugh's understated score to a blaring 80s anthem, the contrast is what makes the escalation feel so dramatic. The show earned its quiet moments so that its loud moments would hit harder. And then there's the finale, which uses David Bowie's Heroes. I've already mentioned this, but I want to sit with it for a moment longer, because the song choice is so perfect, it almost feels like cheating. Heroes is a song about two lovers who know their time is finite, who know they can be heroes just for one day. And it plays over a montage of the park crew living out the rest of their lives, aging, changing, losing people, finding new things. The song says, "This is temporary. Everything is temporary. But for one moment, it can be extraordinary." And isn't that Regular Show? Isn't the entire show about taking the temporary, the mundane, the regular, and making it extraordinary for 11 minutes, and then letting it end? The fact that Bowie died in January 2016, almost exactly a year before the finale aired on January 16th, 2017, adds a layer of real-world grief to the song choice that hits regardless of whether Quintel intended it. Heroes was already a song about the beautiful brevity of life, using it to close a show about growing up, set to images of characters aging and changing and losing people, and played in the aftermath of Bowie's own death, transforms it into something transcendent. It's not just a closing credits song, it's an elegy for Pops, for the show, for everyone watching who is a little older than they were when they first heard Mordecai say, "Ooh," and started watching two slackers destroy a park every Monday night. I want to spend a moment on Over the Top, Season 2, because I think it's one of the most darkly funny episodes of the entire series, and it perfectly encapsulates the show's attitude toward death and consequences. The setup: Rigby uses a cheating device called the Playco Arm Boy to beat Skips at arm wrestling. Skips, who is an immortal Yeti with centuries of competitive pride, gets so enraged that when he finally arm wrestles Rigby fairly, he slams him through a table hard enough to kill him. Skips kills Rigby through a table because he was angry about losing at arm wrestling. And the show opens with Rigby being pronounced dead at the hospital, then flashes back to show how they got there. The episode is a reference to the 1987 Sylvester Stallone movie, Over the Top, The title is right there, and it features Skips having to arm wrestle Death himself to win back Rigby's soul. Death, designed to resemble Motorhead vocalist Lemmy Kilmister with his signature facial hair and British accent, has a comically muscular right arm and plays the encounter like a casual sporting event. The stakes are life and death. The framing is sports comedy. And the show plays both of those things at full volume simultaneously. This is regular show in its purest form. A character dies. Another character has to fight the Grim Reaper to bring them back. And the whole thing is structured like a sports movie parody. The darkness and the humor aren't separate. They're fused together at the molecular level. And the episode ends with Skips cheating to beat Death, using the same device Rigby used to cheat him, which means Skips literally cheated Death. The phrase is the punchline. And then lectures Rigby about the importance of not cheating. The hypocrisy is the joke. The death is real. The lesson is genuine. And the show wraps all three of those things in 11 minutes and moves on to the next episode like nothing happened. That's the thing about regular show that I think people underestimate. The density. These episodes are only 11 minutes long, and they pack more character development, more thematic complexity, and more genuine emotional weight into those 11 minutes than most hour-long dramas manage. And part of that is because the show trusts its audience to keep up. It doesn't explain. It doesn't handhold. It gives you a scene where Skips kills Rigby through a table, and it assumes you'll understand that this is simultaneously a joke, a commentary on competitive ego, a meditation on the consequences of anger, and a setup for a Lemmy Kilmister lookalike arm wrestling match against an immortal Yeti. If you can't juggle all of those things at once, the show doesn't care. It's already moved on to the next scene. And speaking of death, and honestly, looking back at my notes, I'm kind of amazed at how many episodes of this show involve characters literally dying. I want to highlight It's Time from season 2, because it might be the single most disturbing 11 minutes regular show ever produced. The premise: Mordecai gets jealous because Rigby has a date with Margaret. Mordecai's jealousy escalates until he accidentally pushes Rigby off a microwave into some kind of temporal vortex, and Rigby is erased from existence. Not knocked out, not injured, erased, gone. And Mordecai has to navigate a nightmarish time loop, confronting his own jealousy and guilt to undo what he did. The episode is shot through with this queasy, uncomfortable energy that is completely different from the show's usual tone. There are melting clocks. There are distorted faces. There's a sequence where Father Time himself appears and judges Mordecai for his actions. And the thing that makes it so unsettling isn't the supernatural elements. It's the realism of the emotional trigger. Mordecai's jealousy is petty and ugly and recognizable. It's the kind of jealousy that most people experience in their teens and 20s. The kind that makes you do things you immediately regret. And the show takes that real, common, very human emotion and shows you its logical extreme. If your jealousy could kill, it would. If your worst impulses had supernatural consequences, they would destroy the people you love. I need you to think about that for a second. A show on Cartoon Network, rated TVPG, aired an episode where a main character murders his best friend out of jealousy over a girl, gets trapped in a psychological hellscape as punishment, and has to earn redemption by confronting the ugliest parts of himself. That's not a kid's show. That's a Dostoevsky novel in 11-minute animated form. Let me talk about the show's production process for a minute, because I think understanding how regular show was made helps explain why it turned out the way it did. Each episode took roughly 9 months to produce. That's 9 months for 11 minutes of animation. The show used storyboarding and hand-drawn animation, with Quintel deliberately recruiting young independent comic book artists to serve as storyboard artists because he felt their style, the ability to both write and draw, matched the sensibility he wanted. He found these artists by browsing blogs, convention panels, and CalArts student animation showcases. This approach gave the show a visual and narrative consistency that you don't always see in television animation. The storyboard artists weren't just illustrating scripts, they were co-writing them, shaping the dialogue and pacing and emotional beats of each episode through the visual storytelling process. This is why regular show's timing is so good, why the comedic beats land so precisely, and why the emotional moments feel so organic. The show was built by people who understood visual storytelling at a fundamental level, and who were given the creative freedom to express that understanding. Quintel was leading a team of about 35 people by 2012, and by all accounts, the creative environment was collaborative and personal. The writer's room drew heavily from the staff's own lives. Real arguments, real social situations, real emotional experiences, and filtered those experiences through the show's escalation formula. This is why the show feels so lived in, so specific in its observations about young adult life. It wasn't written by people guessing what 20-somethings might think or feel. It was written by actual 20-somethings, drawing directly from their own experiences. And the distance between the writers and their material was essentially zero. I keep coming back to the question of audience, and I want to address it one more time before I wrap up, because I think it's the central tension of the entire show. Who was regular show for? The answer, I think, is that it was for everyone who needed it, and different people needed it for different reasons. Kids needed it because it was fun and exciting, and the escalation formula gave them something new and surprising every episode. Teenagers needed it because Mordecai and Rigby's social dynamics, the awkwardness, the jealousy, the friend drama, mirrored their own experiences with startling accuracy. Young adults needed it because the show understood their economic anxiety, their romantic failures, their existential dread, and their nostalgia for an era many of them were too young to actually remember. And actual adults, people with mortgages and children and responsibilities, needed it because it reminded them of what it felt like to be young and stupid and alive, and because it was honest about the fact that growing up means losing things you can never get back. Quintel threaded all of those needles simultaneously for 8 seasons without ever losing his balance. And the show's secret weapon was always the same. It treated its audience with respect. It never talked down. It never simplified. It never assumed that because something was animated, it had to be shallow. It just told its stories. Weird, dark, funny, heartbreaking, absurd, sincere, and trusted that the right people would find them, and they did. The show's ratings peaked in season 4, when the premiere Exit 9B drew over 3 million viewers. That's 3 million people watching a half-hour animated special on Cartoon Network about villains from past episodes being resurrected to take over a park. 3 million people who understood, on some level, that this wasn't just a cartoon. This was something worth showing up for. I want to come back to something I mentioned much earlier, the show's relationship with Cartoon Network's broader programming strategy, because I think it adds important context to everything I've been saying. Regular Show premiered in September 2010 as part of what people now call the Cartoon Network Renaissance. It launched alongside Adventure Time, which had premiered a few months earlier in April 2010. These two shows, together, transformed Cartoon Network from a network that was struggling creatively, the CN Real era, Anyone, into a powerhouse of creator-driven animation. Adventure Time got most of the cultural attention, and I understand why. It was louder, weirder, more visually experimental, and it attracted a massive online fandom. Pendleton Ward, its creator, was Quintel's classmate at CalArts, and the two shows share a creative DNA, even though they're tonally very different. But here's the thing. Regular Show was, in many ways, the more mature show. Adventure Time explored its darkness through fantasy and mythology, distant kingdoms, ancient evils, post-apocalyptic landscapes. Regular Show explored its darkness through the mundane. Its setting was a park. Its characters had jobs. Its conflicts were about rent and relationships and responsibilities. And when the darkness surfaced, it surfaced not in some fantasy realm, but in the characters' everyday lives, which made it hit harder because there was nowhere to hide. You couldn't dismiss it as allegory. You couldn't retreat into the fantasy framework. When Mordecai was depressed, he was just depressed. No magical curse, no evil spell, just a guy sitting in the dark, listening to sad music because the person he loved left. I think Regular Show's legacy, when we look back on it from the vantage point of 2026, is that it proved something that the animation industry desperately needed to hear. You can make a show for adults and air it on a children's network, and it will work. Not because you're tricking kids into watching adult content, but because good storytelling doesn't have an age limit. The themes of Regular Show, friendship, responsibility, loss, growth, the fear of change, are universal. An 8-year-old understands them differently than a 28-year-old, but they understand them. And a show that can speak to both audiences simultaneously, without condescending to either, is doing something rare and valuable and worth celebrating. Close enough, Quintel's follow-up series for HBO Max went even further in the adult direction. It was explicitly an animated comedy for adults, dealing with marriage, parenthood, and the challenges of your 30s. It ran from 2020 to 2022, and while it was well received, it never achieved the cultural footprint of Regular Show. And I think part of the reason is that Regular Show's power came specifically from the tension between its surface and its subtext. The fact that it was technically a kid's show was part of what made it special. The restrictions forced Quintel to be creative. The TVPG rating meant he had to find ways to express adult emotions without adult language, to depict darkness without graphic content, to tell stories about loss and grief and existential fear using the vocabulary of a cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon. And those constraints produced something more interesting, more layered, and more enduring than a show with no restrictions ever could have. That's one of the great paradoxes of Regular Show. It was never for kids, but it was better because it had to pretend it was. And I want to add one more thing to that observation, because I think it matters for the future of animation. Regular Show, alongside Adventure Time, and later shows like Steven Universe and Gravity Falls, proved that animated television could be art, not elevated entertainment, not surprisingly good for a cartoon. Art. Full stop. The kind of storytelling that changes how you see the world, that stays with you for years, that you return to at different points in your life and find different things each time. Quintel and his contemporaries, Pendleton Ward, Rebecca Sugar, Alex Hirsch, blew open the doors of what American animation was allowed to be, and the industry has never been the same. But of all those creators, I think Quintel was the most subtle. His revolution was quieter. He didn't build a fantasy world like Ooh or Beach City or Gravity Falls. He built a park, a regular park, with regular jobs and regular problems and regular people, plus a Yeti, a ghost, a gumball machine, and a raccoon. And he made the regular extraordinary not by adding magic to it, but by looking at it closely enough to see the magic that was already there. The magic of friendship, the magic of growing up, the magic of being alive in a world where chairs need setting up, and libraries need their books returned, and someone, somewhere, is always trying to destroy reality. And you deal with it because that's what you do. You deal with it and you go home, and you drink a soda, and you come back tomorrow. That's Regular Show. That's the whole show. And it was never ever, not for a single second, actually for kids. You know what's funny is that I came into this video thinking I'd spend most of my time talking about the supernatural elements, the 80s references, the escalation formula, the cool stuff, the fun stuff, and instead, I keep coming back to the emotional core. I keep coming back to Skip's Morning Mona, to Mordecai sitting on a roof with a soda and a broken heart, to Benson screaming not because he's angry, but because he's exhausted, to Pops hugging his brother before pushing them both into the sun. And I think that's the point. I think that's what Quintel understood from the very beginning, from the moment he pitched this show to Cartoon Network in 2008, using a storyboard. Because, as he put it, he didn't think verbally pitching such an odd concept would have made sense to anyone. But before I bring this all the way home, there's one more area I need to spend time with, because I think it's crucial, and it rarely gets discussed. The way Regular Show depicts male friendship and male vulnerability, because this might be the show's most quietly radical act. Think about the animated shows that were on television before Regular Show. Think about how male characters in cartoons typically interact. They compete, they fight, they joke. They're brave and strong and confident. What they don't do, almost ever, is admit weakness. They don't cry. They don't say, "I need you." They don't sit in silence with each other, because words aren't enough. And Regular Show does all of those things, constantly, without ever framing them as exceptional or unusual. Mordecai cries multiple times across the series. He cries when Margaret leaves. He cries when things go wrong with CJ. He's emotionally open in a way that male cartoon characters almost never are, and the show never punishes him for it. Rigby cries too. At the end of Skip's story, both Mordecai and Rigby are openly weeping while Skips is left alone with his memories, and neither of them is embarrassed about it. Even Muscle Man, the most performatively masculine character on the show, cries. He cries at his wedding. He cries when his father dies. He cries because he loves Starla, and he's terrified of losing her. And here's what gets me about this. The show never makes a speech about it. There's no "it's okay for boys to cry" Very special episode. There's no moment where a character says real men show their emotions. The show just shows it. It normalizes male vulnerability by treating it as a fact rather than a lesson. Men cry. Friends sit in silence. People who love each other admit they're scared. That's just how it is. Moving on. For a show that aired on Cartoon Network from 2010 to 2017, at a time when the cultural conversation about masculinity was undergoing significant shifts, this feels quietly revolutionary. Regular Show didn't lecture its audience about toxic masculinity or emotional intelligence. It just modeled healthy male emotional expression through its characters, episode after episode, season after season, until it became normal. Until you forgot that other cartoons didn't do this. Until you expected male characters to be emotionally honest, because Regular Show had taught you that they could be. And I think this connects directly to the show's dual-track structure. On the surface, track 1, you have a show about dudes doing dude stuff. Video games, arm wrestling, monster fights, workplace rivalries. It looks, from the outside, like a standard boys cartoon. But on track 2, underneath the action and the comedy, you have a show about emotional growth, about learning to be vulnerable, about the slow, painful process of becoming a person who can say, I'm scared, or I'm sorry, or I love you, without the world ending. And the genius of Regular Show is that it never presents these two things as contradictory. You can fight a space monster and cry about your ex-girlfriend. You can save the universe and admit that you're lonely. Strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. They're the same thing. I need to talk about one more episode before I wrap up, and it's Laundry Woes, the Season 5 premiere. This episode picks up right after Margaret leaves for college at the end of the Season 4. Mordecai is devastated. He finds Margaret's sweater in the laundry, and he can't let it go. He drives 20 hours to her college to return it. 20 hours for a sweater. And along the way, he has hallucinations, visions of Margaret, distorted memories, surreal road trip imagery that captures the specific insanity of early breakup grief with an accuracy that I still find uncomfortable. This episode aired on September 2nd, 2013. I was in my early 20s, and I remember watching it and thinking, how does this show know? How does it know what that specific kind of heartbreak feels like? The kind where you fixate on an object, a piece of clothing, a stupid sweater, because letting go of the object means accepting that the person is really gone. How does a Cartoon Network show about a blue jay capture post-breakup psychology with more nuance and honesty than most live-action dramas? And the answer, I think, is Quintel. It's always Quintel. The man poured his life into this show, his experiences, his observations, his pain. He's talked about how the characters' situations came from real life, from his own life, and the lives of his writers. And that authenticity is what makes Regular Show resonate in a way that more polished, more carefully constructed shows never do. It's messy, it's imperfect, it's sometimes frustrating, and sometimes painful, and sometimes awkward, in ways that feel accidental, even though they're clearly intentional. Just like life. Just like being 23 and in love, and terrible at it. The other thing I want to flag about Laundry Woes is its ending. After all the hallucinations, and the 20-hour drive, and the emotional chaos, Mordecai arrives at Margaret's college, and he doesn't confess his love. He doesn't beg her to come back. He just returns the sweater. He says something small and simple, and then he drives home. And on the drive home, there's a moment, a tiny, blink and you miss it moment, where he smiles. Just a little, because returning the sweater was about letting go. Not dramatically, not heroically, not in a way that makes for a good story. Just quietly, just enough, just for now. If you've ever gone through a breakup, a real one, the kind that rearranges your internal furniture, you know that moment. The first time you do something that feels like healing, even though it's small and stupid, and nobody else would understand why it matters. The first time you smile, and it's not forced. That's what Laundry Woes is about. Not the supernatural escalation, not the hallucinations, not the 20-hour drive. The smile, the tiny, private, nearly invisible moment of beginning to be okay. I also want to mention something about the show's visual design that I think contributes to its adult appeal in ways people don't always consciously register. Regular Show's animation style is deliberately simple. The character designs are clean and almost minimalist. Mordecai is a blue jay, drawn with maybe 20 lines. Rigby is even simpler. The backgrounds are more detailed and realistic than the characters. creating this interesting visual tension where cartoon characters exist in spaces that feel like real places. The park looks like a park. The coffee shop looks like a coffee shop. The roads and cars and buildings look like roads and cars and buildings. This design philosophy does something really smart. It grounds the show. The characters might be a blue jay and a raccoon and a gumball machine, but they live in a world that looks like ours. And when the supernatural escalation happens, when reality distorts, when monsters appear, when the sky cracks open, the contrast between the realistic backgrounds and the impossible events creates a visual dissonance that mirrors the show's thematic dissonance. Normal life and cosmic chaos aren't supposed to coexist, but in regular show, they do, every day. And the visual design makes that coexistence feel both natural and slightly wrong, which is exactly how the show wants you to feel. Quintel was also inspired by British television, which is worth noting because it helps explain the show's particular brand of humor. He's mentioned The Mighty Boosh, The IT Crowd, The League of Gentlemen, The Office, and Little Britain as influences, all of which were introduced to him by his British roommate at CalArts. British comedy tends to be more comfortable with awkwardness, with failure, with characters who are genuinely unlikable, and with humor that doesn't resolve into neat lessons. You can see all of those qualities in regular show. The show is comfortable letting its characters fail. It's comfortable with awkwardness. It's comfortable with situations that don't resolve neatly. And that British sensibility, combined with Quintel's love of 80s American pop culture and the escalation formula, created a tonal cocktail that was completely unique in American animation. The show was also influenced by video games. Quintel played Street Fighter, Shadowrun, and ToeJam and Earl as a kid, and those games' sensibilities bleed through constantly. The escalation formula itself feels like a video game. Start at level 1, mundane task. Escalate through increasingly difficult stages, supernatural complications. Face a final boss, episode climax, and reset. The arcade cabinets that appear throughout the show aren't just set dressing. They're structural DNA. Regular show is, in many ways, a video game translated into a narrative format. And the audience that grew up playing those games recognized the structure instinctively, even if they couldn't articulate it. Okay, I really am wrapping up now. I've been going for a long time, and I appreciate your patience. If you've made it this far, and I know some of you are already asleep, and that's okay. That's literally what this video is for. Then you understand something about regular show that casual viewers never grasp. But before I close, I want to touch on one more thing, because I think it ties everything together in a way that nothing else can. The show's title, Regular Show. Think about that title. It's the most boring, most generic, most deliberately misleading title in the history of animation. And Cartoon Network leaned into it. Their tagline was, Regular Show. It's anything but. And most people interpret the title as ironic. The show isn't regular at all. It's insane. It's supernatural. It's cosmic. The title is a joke, but I don't think it is. I think the title is the most honest thing about the show. Because here's the thing. All of the supernatural stuff, the escalation, the monsters, the cosmic battles, that's the wrapper. That's the packaging. What the show is actually about, what it's always about, in every single episode, is regular stuff. Jobs, friendships, relationships, growing up, losing people, finding yourself, learning to take responsibility. These are the most regular, most ordinary, most universal experiences in human life. And the show calls itself Regular Show because that's what it is. It's a show about regular things. The fact that those regular things happen to be filtered through interdimensional chaos and 80s power ballads doesn't change what they are. It just makes them visible in a way that realist fiction sometimes can't. Quintel understood something that I think a lot of creators miss. The mundane is profound. Setting up chairs is profound. Making a sandwich is profound. Drinking a soda on a roof with your friend after a bad day is profound. These moments don't need to be dressed up or elevated or made special. They already are special. They're just hard to see because we live inside them. And what regular show does, what the escalation formula does, what the supernatural elements do, is create enough distance from the mundane that we can finally see it clearly. The cosmic chaos is a lens. The regular stuff is the subject. I think about a moment near the end of Stake Me Amadeus, the season 4 finale I talked about earlier. After Margaret leaves, after the heartbreak, after the dramatic escalation with the Capicola gang, and the explosions and the chaos, The episode ends with Mordecai and Rigby on the roof. Two guys, two sodas, sunset, silence, and the camera holds on them for longer than it needs to. Long enough to feel the weight of the moment. Long enough to understand that this still, quiet, regular moment is what the show was building toward the entire episode. Not the explosions, not the villain fight. This, two friends, a roof, a sunset, nothing else. That's regular show. That's the whole show, right there in one image. Two friends who love each other, sitting together in the aftermath of something terrible, not saying anything, because nothing needs to be said. And the supernatural chaos, the 80s music, the gumball machine boss, the immortal Yeti, the ghost with a hand on his head, all of that exists to get you to this moment. All of that exists to make this regular, ordinary, devastating moment feel as important as it actually is. I want to trace one final thread, and then I'll let you go. The show's relationship with time. Regular show is obsessed with time. Time travel appears in multiple episodes. Characters interact with future versions of themselves. The finale involves a literal rewind of time to the show's first episode. Father Time appears as a character. Mordecai kills Rigby by pushing him into a time vortex. Skips has lived through centuries. The Guardians of Eternal Youth have existed outside of time. Anti-Pops has reset the universe an infinite number of times. Even the show's format, 11-minute episodes, reset every time, is a comment on time, on the way we experience stories as compressed loops of experience, followed by forgetting. And I think the show's obsession with time connects to its core theme in a way that most viewers never consciously register. Growing up is, fundamentally, about time, about the passage of time, about the fact that you can't go back, about the fact that the person you were at 23 is not the person you'll be at 33 or 43 or 57, about the fact that the moments that feel eternal, the summers with your friends, the long nights of doing nothing, the golden hours in the park when nothing matters and everything is perfect, those moments end. They have to end. And the question the show keeps asking, over and over, from its first episode to its last, is, can you accept that? Can you let the moment end without trying to freeze it, reset it, hold it in place forever? Pops couldn't. He and Anti-Pops were trapped in an infinite cycle because neither of them could accept an ending. The universe kept resetting because the battle never resolved. And the only way to break the cycle was for Pops to accept his own death, to choose ending over repetition, mortality over immortality, finality over the comfort of an infinite loop. And in making that choice, Pops didn't just save the universe. He freed his friends to actually live, to age, to change, to become the people they were supposed to become, instead of being trapped in an eternal version of their 23-year-old selves. That's the show's final, devastating insight, and it's one that I think about almost every day. The thing that's holding you back might be the thing you're clinging to the hardest. The park, the routine, the familiarity, the comfort of knowing what tomorrow looks like, because it looks exactly like today. You have to let it go. Not because it was bad, it was wonderful actually. It was the best time of your life, but because holding on to it prevents you from having anything else. Nostalgia is beautiful, but living inside your nostalgia is a prison. And the key is always the same: acceptance. Acceptance that time passes. Acceptance that things change. Acceptance that the people you love will not always be here, and neither will you. And that's not tragic. That's what makes every moment matter. Regular Show taught me that. A cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon who work at a park taught me that. And I know how ridiculous that sounds. I know. But I also know I'm not the only person in the world who feels this way. Because every time I mention Regular Show in conversation, someone's eyes light up. And they say something like, that show was special. And they mean it in a way that goes deeper than nostalgia for a childhood cartoon. They mean it the way you'd say it about a friend who changed your life. Quietly, seriously, with a weight that surprises them. And you know what's wild? The show knew. It knew this would happen. It knew that people would still be talking about it years after it ended, still rewatching it, still finding new things in it. The finale literally shows Pops watching his friends on a tape labeled Regular Show from heaven, or whatever version of the afterlife the show imagines. He's rewatching. He's doing exactly what we're doing right now. He's sitting somewhere quiet, looking back at something that mattered, and smiling because it happened, and crying a little because it's over. The show predicted its own legacy. It turned itself into a rewatch. It told us, in its final moments that the best thing you can do with a beautiful experience is remember it, honor it, and then, when you're ready, eject the tape and move on. Jolly good show indeed. So here's the question I keep coming back to. The one I opened this whole video by promising to explore, and the one I still, after all of this, do not have a satisfying answer to. Let me trace one more thread through the show before I start heading toward the end, because I think it pulls everything together. The show's relationship with friendship. Regular Show is, at its core, a show about a friendship between two people who are not equal. Mordecai is taller, smarter, more socially competent, and more aware of his own failures. Rigby is shorter, lazier, more impulsive, and more willing to lie, cheat, and scheme to get what he wants. In early seasons, the dynamic is clear. Mordecai is the responsible one. Rigby is the wild card, and the tension between them drives most plots. But as the show progresses, something subtle and remarkable happens. Rigby grows up more than Mordecai does. This is one of the show's most subversive moves, and I don't think it gets enough credit. The character who starts as the irresponsible one, the dropout, the one who literally faked his high school diploma, he's the one who actually commits to personal growth. Rigby gets his GED. He graduates high school properly in Rigby's graduation day special in season 7. He builds a genuine, healthy relationship with Eileen. He becomes, quietly and without fanfare, the more emotionally mature member of the duo. Meanwhile, Mordecai, the one we thought was the responsible one, reveals himself to be the one who's actually stuck. His romantic self-sabotage, his inability to commit, his pattern of avoidance dressed up as thoughtfulness. Mordecai is the character who looks like an adult but isn't, and Rigby is the character who looks like a child but is actually growing. And the show doesn't make a big speech about this. It just shows you across 8 seasons and lets you draw the conclusion yourself. The friendship between them survives all of this. That's the other thing. Through every fight, every betrayal, every dude, you went too far moment, and there are many, some of them genuinely painful, Mordecai and Rigby stay friends. Not because friendship is easy, or because the show romanticizes their bond, but because friendship is a choice you make every day, even when the other person is driving you insane, especially when they're driving you insane. The show earned its emotional ending. Mordecai and Rigby as old men, reunited at the park, laughing about how immature they used to be, by spending 8 seasons showing the cost of that friendship. The fights, the resentments, the moments where one of them genuinely hurt the other, the apologies, the silences, the sodas on the roof. And can I just say, the relationship between Rigby and Eileen is one of the most underrated love stories in animation. Because unlike Mordecai's romantic disasters, Rigby and Eileen's relationship develops organically and without drama. Eileen likes Rigby from the start. Rigby is oblivious, then dismissive, then gradually, slowly, quietly, begins to reciprocate. There's no cosmic escalation, no love triangles, no dramatic breakups, just 2 people who are weirdly perfect for each other, finding their way to each other at a pace that feels real. Minty Lewis voices Eileen with this warm, slightly nerdy sincerity that makes every scene she's in better. And when the finale confirms that Rigby and Eileen got married and had children, it feels earned in a way that Mordecai's love life never quite managed. Because Rigby didn't overthink it. He just let it happen. He grew up enough to let someone love him. Okay, I've been going for a while now, and I want to talk about a few more episodes that I think embody the show's not for kids quality in ways that often get overlooked. And then I'll bring this home. It's Time, Season 2. This is the episode where Mordecai is so jealous of Rigby spending time with Margaret that he accidentally kills Rigby. I need to say that again. Mordecai kills Rigby. He pushes him off a microwave into a time vortex, and Rigby is erased. And Mordecai then has to navigate a time loop to undo it. And the show plays Mordecai's guilt completely straight. It's not comedic guilt. It's real, sick, I just killed my best friend guilt. And the episode ends with the timeline being fixed, but the implication lingers. Mordecai's jealousy almost permanently cost him the person who matters most. In an 11-minute cartoon on Cartoon Network. Dead at 8, the episode about Death hiring Mordecai and Rigby to babysit his son, Thomas. This episode was accidentally rated TVY7FV during its first broadcast, which is both hilarious and extremely revealing about how casual the show was with its darker content. Death, the literal Grim Reaper, needs a babysitter. His kid is a nightmare. The episode treats death as a person as mundane domestic comedy, and the subtext is that even death has parenting problems. Even the embodiment of mortality has to deal with the mundane indignities of childcare. That's not a kids' show joke. That's an Albert Camus joke. Skip Strikes, the episode where Death tries to reveal Skip's real name to embarrass him, and the whole thing takes place during a bowling tournament. This is an episode where the central tension is that a character's secret grief might be exposed publicly, and the threat isn't physical, it's emotional. That's sophisticated. That's the kind of stakes that soap operas and prestige dramas deal in. And Regular Show wraps it in a bowling episode. Rigby's Graduation Day Special, the Season 7 finale, where Rigby finally graduates high school. I've already talked about why this matters thematically, but I want to highlight one specific moment. When Rigby walks across the stage, and the park crew is there to watch him. Benson, Skips, Pops, Muscle Man, High Five Ghost, Mordecai, they're all there, and they're proud of him. These weird, dysfunctional, supernatural coworkers who have been through apocalypses together. They showed up for Rigby's high school graduation. And the fact that this is also the episode where the park gets launched into space, where Rigby literally walks across the stage and then immediately has to deal with the park being encased in a dome and leaving Earth, is the most Regular Show thing imaginable. Your greatest personal achievement and the end of the world happen simultaneously. Growth and catastrophe are the same event. Let me bring in something I haven't talked about much yet: the show's villains. Because Regular Show has some of the most creative and thematically interesting antagonists in animation, and they're almost always metaphors for the things the show is really about. Garrett Bobby Ferguson, the giant floating head who holds the record at a Broken Bones arcade game. He's a parody of Billy Mitchell, the real-world competitive gaming champion, and the episode actually led to a lawsuit from Mitchell against Cartoon Network, which a judge dismissed. GBF is a villain who exists because of ego, because someone's sense of identity is so wrapped up in a meaningless achievement that they'll do anything to protect it. He's a metaphor for the way people cling to past accomplishments instead of moving forward. He literally clings to a high score. Gene, the manager of the rival park, East Pines. Gene is Benson's nemesis, and their rivalry is essentially a commentary on workplace competition. Gene is what Benson could become if he let his competitive instincts override his genuine care for his employees. He's the Dark Mirror. Anti-Pops, the series' final antagonist, Pops' evil twin. I've already talked about what he represents cosmically, but on a character level, Anti-Pops is pure destruction. He rates everything 1 star. He exists to negate, to erase, to tear down. He's the opposite of creation, the opposite of joy, the opposite of Pops' innocent love for the world. And the fact that Pops defeats him, not with violence, but with a hug, with empathy, with love, with genuine connection, is the show's final thesis statement. Destruction is easy. Creation requires sacrifice. There's also the format Wars arc, which deserves mention because it's one of the nerdiest deep cuts the show ever attempted. DVD, Blu-ray, and internet, later upgraded to HD DVD and streaming, are literal characters in the show, representatives of competing media formats who wage war with each other. This arc spans multiple episodes across several seasons and treats the real-world evolution of home media technology as an apocalyptic conflict. The final season includes streaming as a villain who allies with Anti-Pops, and there's something genuinely prescient about the show positioning digital streaming as a destructive, corporate force that threatens to erase everything that came before it. In 2016, when these episodes were being written, streaming was already dominant, but not yet the monopolistic force it would become. Regular Show saw it coming and encoded its anxiety about the death of physical media into a literal space war. I keep calling this a dark show, and I want to be clear about what I mean by that. I don't mean dark like edgy, or violent for the sake of violence. I mean dark like honest. Regular Show never lied to its audience about what life is actually like. It never pretended that hard work is always rewarded, that the right person always loves you back, that your friends will never hurt you, that growing up is fun, or that the people you love will live forever. It told the truth about all of those things, wrapped in a candy coating of supernatural escalation and 80s music, and it trusted its audience, whether they were 8 or 28, to handle the truth. And the thing is, kids can handle it. That's the other lesson of Regular Show. We underestimate children's capacity for complexity. An 8-year-old watching Pop's sacrifice might not understand the cosmic metaphor, but they understand sacrifice. They understand that someone good did something brave, and it cost them everything. They understand that the other characters are sad. They understand loss, and maybe, the show helps them understand those things a little better than they would have otherwise. But the show wasn't made for them. It was made for us, for the people who are still watching it at 2 in the morning, years after it ended, because something about it spoke to us in a way that nothing else did. For the people who are Mordecai, stuck, scared, overthinking everything, avoiding the present by retreating into nostalgia. For the people who are Rigby, impulsive, irresponsible, but growing, always growing, even when it doesn't look like it from the outside. For the people who are Benson, holding it together, showing up every day, wondering if anyone notices. For the people who are Skips, carrying old grief, being strong for others, skipping instead of walking because the only person who made walking worthwhile is gone. Regular show ran for 8 seasons, September 6th, 2010 to January 16th, 2017. 244 episodes, 1 Emmy win, multiple additional Emmy nominations, Annie Award nominations, BAFTA nominations. It launched alongside Adventure Time as the twin pillars of what people call the Cartoon Network Renaissance. And when it ended on its own terms, with a finale that Quintel planned and executed deliberately, that tied every thread back to the beginning. And that said, clearly and unmistakably, this is over. These characters grew up. This story is finished. And in June 2024, Warner Brothers Discovery announced a new series, regular show, The Lost Tapes, with Quintel returning as showrunner. Mark Hamill confirmed he'd reprise his role as Skips. The show is set to premiere on Cartoon Network on May 11th, 2026, and I have complicated feelings about that. On one hand, more regular show from Quintel is undeniably exciting. On the other hand, the original ending was so perfect, so complete, so final, that reopening it feels risky. But I trust Quintel, the man who took an acid trip short film and turned it into one of the most emotionally intelligent animated series ever made, has earned my trust. And that brings me to a question I've been sitting with for weeks, and I genuinely don't have the answer. Why did this show connect so deeply with an entire generation of young adults? I mean, I know the surface answers. The 80s nostalgia, the escalation comedy, the relatable characters. But there are lots of shows with relatable characters. There are lots of shows with good comedy. What was it about regular show specifically that made people feel like it understood them in a way that nothing else did? Was it the honesty? The willingness to let things hurt? The fact that Mordecai didn't get the girl and Rigby grew up more than anyone expected, and Benson was right all along, and Pops had to die for the universe to survive? Was it the way the show treated adulthood, not as a destination, but as a process? Messy, painful, sometimes funny, always ongoing? Or was it something simpler? Was it just the feeling of watching a show that was made by someone who remembered what it was like to be 23, and terrified and stuck in a dead-end job, and in love with someone who was probably wrong for you, and playing video games instead of fixing the hole in your wall? Was it the feeling of being seen, truly, honestly, uncomfortably seen, by a cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon? I've turned this question over in my head from every possible angle. I've rewatched episodes I haven't seen in years, specifically for this video. I've read interviews with Quintel. I've gone through fan forums. I've dug through production history and wiki pages and review archives. And I keep arriving at the same non-answer. The same frustrating, honest, Mordecai on the roof kind of conclusion. I don't know. I don't know exactly why this particular show, out of all the shows that have ever existed, connected with an entire generation in the specific way that it did. I have theories. I have observations. I have 12,000 words of analysis and tangents and personal reactions that I've just shared with you, but I don't have a clean answer. And I think Quintel would be okay with that, because regular show never gave clean answers. It gave you complicated, messy, human ones. It gave you a finale where the hero dies, but everyone else gets to live. It gave you a love story where the main character doesn't end up with either of the people he spent 5 seasons pursuing. It gave you a workplace comedy where the most reliable employee is a grieving immortal who skips instead of walks because the woman he loved died 200 years ago. It gave you endings that felt like beginnings, and beginnings that felt like endings, and middles that felt like everything, all at once, compressed into 11 minutes and set to the sound of a synthesizer and a scream. I don't know why regular show meant so much to so many people, but I know this. It wasn't because it was regular, and it wasn't because it was for kids. It was because it was honest. Brutally, darkly, hilariously, heartbreakingly honest about what it means to be alive, and young, and scared, and stupid, and loved, and lost, and growing, and resisting growth, and ultimately, inevitably, finally, reluctantly, beautifully, growing up anyway. And honestly, I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I still don't know. I don't know if I'll ever know. Maybe the question is the answer. Maybe the fact that I can't stop thinking about a cartoon that ended almost a decade ago is itself proof that it did something no other show has done. It got under my skin and stayed there, like a catchy song that manifests into a giant cassette tape and terrorizes everyone until you write something even catchier to replace it. If you can't sleep after all that, well, that's what the next video is for. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I mean that. This was a long one, and the fact that you stayed means more than you know. If you haven't subscribed yet, now might be a good time. We'll be back with more deep dives, more late night conversations about the shows that shaped us. But for now, get some rest. Or don't. I'm not your boss. I'm not Benson. Jolly good show.